Hi there, and welcome to the Heart of It All, a podcast all about caregiving. For many people, dealing with decisions about their aging parents is not just up to them and their mom or dad. There are also siblings. With more people come more opinions and ideas, and sometimes getting on the same page with your siblings can be the biggest challenge in caregiving. This week on the pod, sibling relationships. Hey there, I'm Teri Hart. So imagine this. You've done everything right. You've had the talks with your parents. You know their wishes. You have a financial plan for them to age in place, and you are prepared to carry out their medical wishes. Then your sibling or siblings decide all of this is not right. They should live in a home, or they don't want to pay extra for the needed PSWs. That's just one of millions of scenarios that people face. The fact is, when there are multiple kids in a family, there are multiple options of what's best, not to mention spouses and even grandchildren. What we've heard from folks is that the sibling and even extended family relationship can be the hardest part of navigating caregiving for a loved one. This episode is actually our most requested topic. It took us some time to find just the right person to help us navigate this terrain, but we did it. Amy D'AprixWhy is an internationally respected expert on lifestyle issues relating to retirement, aging, caregiving, and family dynamics. With a PhD in social work, Dr. Amy, as she is affectionately known, provides down-to-earth, practical, and professionally informed guidance on life transitions to individuals, professionals, and organizations. Dr. Amy, we are so glad we found you. Thanks so much for being here on the Heart of It All.
It's a pleasure, Teri. Thanks for having me on.
You know, we started this podcast, our very first episode was about how to start these conversations. And I think that maybe I missed the point of emphasizing how important it is to have the entire family involved in those conversations. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of getting all of the siblings on board to talk about the plan?
Yes. And, I like to think about this because when we say all of the family, this is, and I'll say this probably over and over, it's different in every family and who is part of that. Sometimes it's the adult kids. Sometimes it's their spouses too. Sometimes in some families, the in-laws are outlaws, so you don't have them part of the conversation, right? It depends. It could be grandchildren who are involved. So you have to look at your family when we talk about this, right? And who is going to be involved in the care, who is going to be impacted, and who's going to be a disruptor. So I like to say you want everybody involved, those who are involved, impacted, and people might say, well, why would you pull the disruptors in? Because if you get them in the conversation early, they're less likely to disrupt later when the plans are made.
Let's let everybody in, even those people who we may disagree with.
But it doesn't mean you have to get everybody in the same room at the same time. And this, again, depends on, you have to look at your family. That would never have worked in my family. So I have to say, because I'm 4 siblings, so a lot of the mistakes I made are where I learned how to help other families on this one. Because when my mom had a massive stroke, we didn't all have conversation. And what I really wish is we'd had it earlier. Who was going to do what? Who was going to take what role? Who was not interested in having a role? These are honest conversations we need to have in our families. And I think we have to weigh in things too, like, are there mental health issues that need to be considered? Does somebody have a substance abuse issue that's going to get in the way of these family conversations? So we have to, we're not talking about the perfect family. We're talking about real families and how do you do this?
And I think what you're talking about is radical honesty.
Yes, right. And self-honesty, and then also awareness. And Teri, what makes this so hard is we don't start at this point with our siblings. We bring a lifetime of relationship to these conversations, which is why they're so hard.
So you mentioned that you wish that you and your siblings had started that conversation earlier. In researching to talk to you, I discovered this 40-70 rule, which made every light bulb light off in my brain because I love a rule and I love something that's tangible for people to take away. So, Dr. Amy, what is the 40-70 rule?
Yep, that came from Home Instead Senior Care years ago. And what they said, which I love the concept, which is when you're 40 and your parents 70, you should be having these conversations. And when you think about this, the rule works. And I think the idea behind it, of course, is have them early and often is what I say. You've got to, this isn't a one and done. These are evolving conversations as families go through different life stages. When you're talking to your 70-year-old parent, it's a very different situation than when it's your 95-year-old parent. And you have to recognize that you're going to change, the family's going to change, and certainly that the person who's aging is changing.
So, should you and your siblings, and again, there is a disclaimer for this episode, it's impossible to take into consideration every single family dynamic. We are going to be talking about things in this conversation in kind of a general way. We do have some specific questions from listeners at the end that we will get to. So, should siblings always have the conversation with their parents, or is it ever appropriate for the siblings to talk amongst themselves outside of their parents?
I think it's a both and. So the thing that's the key in this, I think, Terry, is that always at the heart of the conversation has to be what does the older adult want? So, as a family, what happens often with adult kids and aging parents is the adult kids are worried about safety, and the aging person is worried about independence. And so, what the adult kids have to do is be able to put themselves in the mindset of their aging parents. And safety is always first. That's a concern. But, the only way we're really safe is if we lock ourselves in a room and never come out. Right. So, yeah, you have to figure out you have to be realistic and you can't have 100% safety. So, everybody's got to be able to have a different thought on this conversation, right? About how they approach it. So, you ask, can the kids ever meet alone? Yes, they can, as long as the conversation isn't, what are we going to do to mom or dad? But what are we gonna do on behalf of keeping their desires, their wishes, their needs at the forefront of our conversation? If siblings are gonna talk alone, which again, I think it's very appropriate for them to be doing that at various times, but first, it would be helpful to know what is it that mom wants? What is it that dad wants, right? So that you understand what their desires are. So we're gonna have to talk about how do you have those conversations. And that doesn't have to be if you have a group of siblings, that may not be that you all go in and talk to mom and dad together. There's probably somebody who has the right relationship to have that conversation. So you can see this as kind of a back and forth thing. The siblings may first say, we're a little worried. We're seeing changes in mom and dad, and they're talking about this. Okay, which one of us is the best person to kind of get a sense of what mom and dad want? Again, that's a less threatening conversation than a group of siblings walking in and sitting down and saying, we need to know what you want. And then back to the siblings, right? To have the conversation.
Okay. I now want to focus on, and we just touched on it there because I think that that's a good framework to start, Amy. But my questions now are going to delve into the really sensitive territory of when these siblings
Don't
disagree.
get along. Yeah.
And sometimes you can get along with them just fine for the first 45 years of your life. And then all when it comes to mom and dad's well being, it's different. So,
Can I give you a line for that that I think you'll like, which is having to do caregiving with your siblings is like having business partners you didn't ask for. So, right.
I love
Because now suddenly these people who maybe you just see on holidays or you have a very cordial relationship with, but you have very different lives, you're coming back together to have to manage something that's challenging and likely you haven't had to do that together and you probably have roles in your family that you're bringing into this.
because I think oftentimes these things can snowball. So, at the first blush, what is the right approach to recognize that there is discord or disagreement or tension? What's the right way to approach that initial arg moment?
Well, and I think we all feel it in our gut when we have this, right? And and you're like, "Oh, they're just driving me crazy because I know the right way to do this." So, I think it is about having a conversation. The most important part to me of these conversations is our approach. It's less what we say and how we approach the conversation. So, this means that we're gonna have to manage our emotion before we get into the conversation, right? So, you have that feeling of tension, you may have to go deal with that elsewhere, and then you can go back and say, and what you're looking for is common ground. So, one of the things I love, and I'm sure many of your listeners know about this, the Harvard Negotiation Project has something about interest versus position. And our position, right, is the thing we hang on to. This is the way I want it to be. And what's beneath that is our interests. The interest is the reason we hold that position. So when you want to find common ground, you have to go out of, I think mom should stay in her home. I think mom should go into senior care living. And you have to go below that and say, what are we trying to accomplish? Why do we each feel that way? Because when you go to that level, now you're at a level where you can actually come to common ground. So the conversation could start, Terry, with something like, I think we both have mom's best interest at heart. We want her to be happy and to feel like she's living where she wants to be and that she's safe. And so we may have different ideas about that, but our goal is the same. From that point, it shifts the conversation.
I love that. Finding the common goal
Yeah, that's the starting point.
versus the position.
So, can I give you an example of that? So, I worked with this brother and sister who they had been very close throughout their life. And then the mom needed care, and the sister took on the role of the main caregiver role. And I always say, call yourself the primary caregiver, not the caregiver, because you want to be a primary caregiver in a caregiving family. You want to leave room for other people. That's the key here. So she was taking that role on. Her brother had had a very difficult relationship with the mom. And so he was pretty hands off. He said, I don't want to really be part of this at all. So their common goal wasn't actually around their mom. It became around their relationship that I helped them find a common goal, which was I said to him, "Okay, I get it. You don't want to care for your mom. That's not you don't really care is what you're telling me." And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "How about your sister?" He said, "Oh, I love my sister and I want a great relationship with her." So what we were able to do was rebuild their relationship. He said, "I'd do anything for my sister." And she said, "What I'd like you to do is call mom every 2 weeks and have a conversation because when you don't talk to her, I'm the one who hears about it. It's adding to my stress. She wants me to fix it. And would you call her every 2 weeks?" And he said, "For you, I'll do that." And he sat there and put it in his phone and diarized it at that moment, right? So that was their common goal. So it doesn't even always have to be about the parents' care when siblings are together. It may be about their relationship.
Excellent, excellent boots on the ground example. I love that, Amy. Thank you. I was thinking about this and I don't know if I'm totally right, but I think that disagreements in this scenario can fall into two different buckets,
Hmm.
and they really are about financial
Hmm.
and actual care.
Who's doing what? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And how are we managing the care? Let's deal with the financial first because get that out of the way because it's icky. What are some questions about the financials that siblings should be asking one another about the financial future of their parents? What are some of the questions that they need to get out of the way?
Yeah. I think this is a great conversation that few families have. I once heard someone say, "We're more comfortable talking with the people we love about our sex lives than about our money." And so this is, talking about your parents' money, talking about, typically adult kids each have different financial abilities, right? And needs. And one may be dependent on the parents right now while the parents are aging. Another one's paying for care at the same time. So I think one of the things is if you can get a baseline about your parents' financial abilities, and that doesn't mean they have to share everything with you, but you have to know what are you dealing with a pot of money for care? Where's that care going to be paid from? So once you have the baseline on that, and again, they don't have to tell you everything, but they can give you an idea can what they can afford and can't afford. Then if it's a family that has significant financial means, one of the questions is often about inheritance. So this is a big topic I hear people talk about. My brother just wants my parents' money. He's just waiting for them to die to get the money. So we're not giving my parents the best care they could get because he's doing that. That may or may not be true, but that needs to come off the table, right? So a conversation about what are you all needing, expecting inheritance wise, if that's an issue, and what are you willing to say I'm willing to give that up so mom or dad has the best care possible. Where does that fit? These are hard conversations. And Terry, I call these essential conversations, talking to the most important people about the most important things in our lives. And the thing about these conversations is a lot of families can't do these alone, and that's okay. You're not a failure as a family if you and your siblings can't all talk about these without some help. So if you need a facilitator of these conversations, get that. It can just really ease things. People behave better when there's a stranger in the room. So there's all the siblings will act so much nicer to each other. There's a facilitator. And the facilitator a skilled facilitator can maneuver these conversations and help you get where you need to get as a family.
What we're talking about is stressors, right? We're talking about a stressful situation. There are very few times when a stressful situation doesn't highlight challenges that already exist. So,
It amplifies them. Yeah.
exactly. So we can't imagine that dealing with aging parents when you are coming together as a group of, what is the saying? A group of colleagues that nobody asked for?
Yeah, a group of business partners that nobody asked for. Yeah. And you're so right. I say the two places where families tend to fall apart and when they're adult families is when they're caregiving and when the estate is red, when you're closing the estate. And so this is a real hot button, and we can avoid it by talking earlier. And if you're listening to this, I think it's important to say, and you're saying, well, I'm already 60. I missed the 40, 70. Wherever you are, start the conversation, right? It's never too late and it's never too early. And it really is true. You have to think about what's the goal of this conversation we're going to have. Thinking about it ahead of time. What's the one thing that we really need to get resolved? And then think about your approach before you get in it. Who needs to be involved? And then when you have the conversation, make sure everybody gets a voice. And one of the key parts of these, Terry, this is a conversation model that we can actually give to your readers that I'm happy to share with you. It's the essential conversations process. But at the end of the conversation, what's really key is that you book the next time to check in because everybody processes at a different speed.
I love the follow-up. I love a follow-up.
It's key, key, key.
All right.
This is the thing I think really helps on this conversation and all conversations is this will translate to the next one we're having. It really helps when you're having this conversation with your siblings, instead of saying, well, what are we all going to do financially? You say, I thought about it. Here's what I feel like I can do. Here's where I am on this. So when you're willing to share where you are and be vulnerable first, it sets the stage for other people. And you can finish that with saying, we're all going to be different on this. I just thought it would be helpful if I started by sharing what for me I can do financially or where I am about the inheritance. And I know we're all going to feel differently, and that's okay. So you've created safety and you've been vulnerable. And those two things, safety and vulnerability, open up the door for everybody to be better able to do that.
One of the most common challenges is where mom and dad are going to live. Aging in place versus a retirement community, it evokes so many emotions in people. What do you do about that topic when two or more people disagree?
Well, first of all, this one has to go back to the parents first. What do they want? And you and I know what they're going to say, right, Terry?
The numbers don't lie, Amy.
The numbers don't lie.
96%, I say it on this podcast frequently, 96% of Canadians over the age of 65 want to age in place.
This is a conversation that really you have to get to what your parents want. Okay. And I'm going to talk about how you have that conversation. And this evokes a lot of emotion in both parties. So, adult kids, again, it's fear that drives this conversation. And because we're afraid for their safety, we're also afraid that if they stay in their own home, what's it going to mean for us if we're honest? And how much am I going to have to do now? And so, it's not all altruistic it's all about our parents. Some of it's about us. And then on the other side, you have the parents who are trying to maintain independence, choice, control, independence. And what I always say to people is think about yourself today, not when you're 80. Think about yourself today. And if I were Terry to start talking to you about, well, it might be better if you moved, you'd look at me like I was crazy, right? You'd be like, what are you talking about? I love my home. I'm not leaving my home. That's exactly how people feel when they're 80, 85, and 90. We think somehow we feel differently as we get older, and we don't. We still want that sense of home. I always say that if you look at in my belief, the number one thing that impacts negatively people's quality of life as they age is not matching their housing to their life stage. And living in your own home can be living in senior care too, if you can see that as your own home. So we want to open all that up. But the way to have the conversation with your parent about this is to say something to the effect of, Mom, Dad, what I want to do is support what you want in your life. And I want to help support you having independence and quality of life. Tell me what's important to you about this. So sometimes we go right to this house isn't working anymore. You're having trouble maintaining it. So what you want to do is start here. Now, one thing we have to say as a caveat here is when dementia is part of this picture, safety is always first. So this may be a very different conversation, but let's talk about people who are cognitively intact for this. So tell me what it is you want. We can tell people, I'm worried about your safety. I don't know if that's going to work well, but we can give it a try. Are you okay if we go into it with knowing that's what you want, but that you and I have another conversation in 2 weeks to see how it's going and be honest about whether this is safe and I'll share with you my feelings and you share yours.
Follow up. Dr. Amy, follow up.
From a big follow-up person.
Okay, so let's talk the sibling factor. Let's talk the one person or two people thinks they should do whatever they can to allow their parents to age in place. One or two people, depending on size of family, say, no way, it's not safe, or it's not financially viable, or whatever their reasons are, they need to go and live somewhere else. How do the siblings talk about this?
I think to the best of our ability, when we can do emotion first, solution second, and I usually say empathy first, solution second. So you got to hear what's behind the plan. Again, this is sort of the interposition thing. I think mom should go home. Well, tell me more about that. Or, I don't think mom should leave here. I worked with a family where that was the case, where the brother was the only one who thought the parent should stay in their home. Dad had some dementia, and he thought, Dad's happy here. I don't want to rock the boat. Right. And the two daughters were like, this is not a good move. This, for lots of reasons. So I've done these conversations, and what you have to get is people to be able to express why they feel this. And he was worried that his dad was not going to have any quality of life if they moved to a senior residence because he loved to rake the yard. So when you can really hear what's behind it, that's again how you can try to find some solution. Doesn't mean you can always get there easily. But in that case, we talked about, okay, so if you're worried about this, maybe we can address these issues to keep your dad happy and deal with that very significant safety issue of them staying in their home.
Okay, so let's talk actual caregiving. Oftentimes, and we are going to get to some listener questions at the end, but oftentimes the caregiving responsibility falls onto one sibling primarily. Before that happens, what do you wish people, families understood about a caregiving journey and what it's going to require of them as siblings?
Yeah. So another giveaway that I think will be helpful is a caregiver task planner that I developed for this very purpose for people, and your listeners can get that from you. That this is where you have to be realistic about, again, caregiving changes constantly. So, and it changes in typically the direction of requiring more care, not less care. So, what oftentimes how people get into caregiving is one of two ways. There's a crisis, and you get a phone call, and you jump in, and either one or more people, they take all of their resources, emotional, practical, sometimes financial, and they put it towards this crisis because there's a stroke or a fall or something. And you can do that for a short period of time, but that's not a long term strategy. But what happens is people get stuck in that strategy sometimes, and it's one that's jumped in. The other way is there's a slow decline where, you take on more and more and more until you're overwhelmed and you didn't even realize you did it. So to your point, Terry, an early conversation would be to acknowledge that caregiving is likely to get more, to talk about who has capacity. And I like to consider, as you look at your family and as you talk, and this is on the care planner too, but geography, where do people live, who has resources, but also skill set and personality and relationships with the parents. So everybody has a different relationship with the parent. And we all know that, but we don't acknowledge that in caregiving. So you have to look at what are the roles in caregiving and who has capacity to take on what. So this is why, again, I go back to the don't call yourself the caregiver. If you take on primary, that doesn't mean you're the sole. But here's another really this I see this in families all the time. When we're the primary caregiver, we assume everybody knows what we're doing and what's needed. And the truth is, typically what happens is Terry, you're handling this so beautifully. You are so confident and you're doing a great job. So me, your sibling, I'm already busy over here. I'm thank you, Terry, for doing that. But I'm not sitting back and thinking, what should I be doing to help Terry? I'm like, oh, thank gosh, she got that covered. But you know what? We think our siblings know what we're doing, and we think that they should step up to the plate and just volunteer. If we can let go of those beliefs, it really helps us in this case. So, what we can do is we can talk about all the tasks of caregiving now and say, this is going to be evolving. And you just write everything down, right?
So, if you are the sibling who is doing the majority of the caregiving, again, I love a practical on this podcast. I love actual language people can use.
Hmm.
What is a way that you can ask your siblings to do more, be more aware, and what is the language that people can use to ask for help?
So, a language, it's all about approach. So you can say something like, Terry, what I realize is that I really haven't done a very good job of sharing all the stuff that's going on around the caregiving. Just own it. Just own it. Don't, you may not feel enough, but just own it. And I think it would be helpful if I shared with everybody what's going on in more detail so that we can figure out how we can look at dividing the tasks, what we can each do, because I'm overwhelmed. And I realize that I just haven't asked for help and I haven't really shared this. Now, you may have shared and you may have asked for help. Who cares? Say it anyway, right? Because the goal isn't to make people wrong.
Create a new line in the sand.
And you can say, I was doing okay up till now, and I realize it's getting to be too much, and I can see the future, it's going to be more. So, what might help is if we look at it now, but we set regular times to maybe hop on a Zoom. I love, by the way, people say, oh, it's less personal to do it virtually. Sometimes what it does is reduce the emotion enough that you can actually have the tougher conversations.
I don't wanna sit here and be vilifying anybody because oftentimes people have really good reasons why they can't be more involved. I often talk about my family here. I don't talk about my brother a ton, not because there's any problems there, he's great,
Yeah.
but he lives in the UK. When you have people who have legitimate reasons, and I'm gonna use geography as the most legitimate reason, what are some things that people can do who are not geographically close, but can help those who are?
Yeah. So this is great. And I would add into that too of the, we talked about some other things like personality and relationships. The other one is obviously finances, but here's another one we often don't use in the formula: life stage. So when my mom had the massive stroke, I was living closest, about 5 hours away. I had siblings long way away. And one of them was a brother who had two young kids, and he was the main parent. So it would have been ridiculous to expect him to do what I was doing. But there was something he could do, and he did. So what we did with my brother, we had to sell my parents' house and move them, was he came down and helped concretely for like 5 days with these tasks, and I didn't have to think about those things. And he contributed, he felt part of the caregiving then, and it relieved me of some stress. So finances are things people can manage from afar a lot of times if the parents need that help, and you know they can manage that today. Booking appointments, you can get on calls with the physicians. If your parents are going to the doctor and, like, let's say, Terry, you're always the one going to the doctor, your brother could Zoom in on those calls so that he's aware of what's going on and can offer input. So we have to be a little more creative with the distance. The other thing that people can do from a distance, which we cannot discount this, is they can provide emotional support to the parent. I said in my family, I managed the caregiving of my parents, but I had a sister who lived closer, and she'd go over and sit and have a glass of wine with my dad and chat. And I said I was the black and white, and she gave them technicolor in their life, right? I mean, that role she played to be there to have dinner occasionally or go do something fun or to just listen to them. That's a role your brother could play from afar. So there are definitely things people can do.
And the pie chart of caregiving is split up into so many pieces.
Oh,
And we really do have to not make one more important than the other, realize
right.
that it is the whole pie that makes up a technicolor life, to borrow your term.
And I think that's key, right? That and again about the finances, maybe the brother the sibling who's not nearby has financial means and can help pay for some care. So what we want to match are the tasks with what's realistic with people. And I'll tell you where I see families not do this because this is key. They'll send the person who's very shy, not very assertive, to the doctor's appointment, and then they say to me, "You know what? They didn't ask any questions." And I said, "Would they normally ask questions?" "No, they're terrible at that. Stop sending them." Right? Don't send the mouse when you need a lion, right? So you got to be realistic about who you are in the family and who's good at what.
I say so frequently on this podcast that if I were to rename the podcast, I would call it None of This is a Surprise.
And yet we act like it is. I love that. Oh my gosh, that's a really great name because I've been doing this for 40 years, and I both work with families, but I also work now with professionals to help them have better relationships with aging families. And things haven't changed a lot, yet we know, you get the stats on this show all the time about how, the percentage of people aging, that we're living longer, and yet we're not being realistic about having these conversations, planning for our care. And the thing to remember is siblings, when your parents pass, you are then the family. And when your family blows up from these sort of things, it takes a long time to put it back together, if ever.
Yeah.
And who do you wanna be? And that's a question I ask siblings. Who do you wanna be together when your parents are gone?
Ah.
Because sometimes that wakes people up.
Let's add that to the list of questions. Who do you want to be as siblings when your parents are gone?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna jump to some listener questions because this is a
Okay.
first for the Heart of It All, and we had a really great response. And I think it gave us some insight into we need to be asking people what they need to know here. So, number one listener question: how do you handle resentment when one sibling is named power of attorney?
Well, one of the things you can do if you have this relationship with your parents is you can ask why. What was the reason behind it? Because we make up a lot of stories. whether it's our 40s, 50s, 60s, at some point in our lives, you hear people say, I always knew mom loved you best, or I always knew dad loved you best. And so we carry that with us. And so this resentment may not be based on anything other than practicality. But let's say your brother got named because your parents do feel that he's more competent than you. I mean, sometimes that happens. And and if you have strong feelings about this and you want to go talk to your parent and you find out why, and then you can have the conversation there. I guess the question would be, my guess is that resentment with the brother is longstanding, that it's not just about this, that this has to do with a dynamic that they've had. So you may just need to own that, I've always resented my brother, and this is just another thing to make me resent him more. And then you can have a conversation with your brother if you can do that, right? And talk about why you think you should be part of this or why you feel left out of this. But I'd start with your parent and get the reason first.
Excellent advice. Question 2. How do I get my sibling to visit our 93-year-old mother? He lives an hour away. I have been gentle and blunt. Nothing is working.
Okay, well, first of all, I remember this brother sister I told you about. Sometimes the way we get people to do things, and I did this with one of my brothers who also said he was not interested in being part of my father's care. They hadn't had a great relationship and he wasn't interested. And I think this is a key point, Teri, that we're often shocked that our siblings don't share our values. And I hear this from families all the time. We grew up in the same house. How can they feel that way? So I want to tell you right now, I've never met a family where every sibling shared the same values. So when it comes up in your family, don't be surprised, right? That we just see the world differently. It's not just our family that forms our values. So in this case, you might be able to get your brother, and it makes me nervous because it's hard to get adults to do things, right? What we're really trying to do is hopefully motivate this person to want to do this. And the way to do it, and how I did it with my brother about helping in the care, was I was burning out and caring for my dad. And I said, would you help me? Would you do something for me? And he said, I'd do anything for you. And I said, well, this is what I need. And that would be the angle I would try first. And the thing I always say to people is all of these suggestions, it's kind of the rule of three. You need to try one thing, and then you need to try another thing, and then you need to try another thing. Also, talking about the impact on us. It always comes back to being vulnerable and being able to say, when you don't call mom, it puts more stress on me. And I know that's not what you're trying to do, but that's the impact. Can you help me with this?
Number 3. What happens when a parent needs to move and is willing to move, but another adult child, my brother, lives with them and relies on them financially? The parent keeps supporting, but there's a worry that the money will run out.
So, what's going to happen eventually is you're going to hit this crisis at some point, right? Whether or not it's now or after the parent passes. How is that adult child going to be supported when the parent's gone is the question I would have. So delaying the conversation. And a lot of times I say, we think sometimes if we ignore things, they'll go away. Typically, you can postpone things, but you can't avoid them. So you could postpone this conversation, but you can't avoid this. Let's say that this sibling who's living in the house with the parent stays and we just play it out that the parent never moves. Well, what happens when the parent dies? Where's that sibling going to live? What's going to happen to the house? Is there an inheritance and that's what they're waiting for? So you have to have an open conversation and figure that piece out first. And I've seen horrible things happen, Teri, where siblings lived in the house, were dependent on the parent died, and then the other sibling sold the house and basically said to the sibling, you're on your own. And, because they were so angry. So I know of a couple cases of this. So what you want to do is talk about realistically with the brother, if you can, the person living in the house, if you can, you may not be able to, and the parent about let's talk about how this is going to go eventually if we don't deal with this.
Boy, that's a hard one, isn't it?
It is.
All right. Number 5, question 5. I'm limiting it to 5 questions because I had 68. Um, And this is a really interesting one. And I think that this is one that happens a lot. How do you deal with the grandchildren who are trying to get involved? They might have different motivation. They're of a different generation. There's so much about maybe one sibling has children, the other ones don't, so there are grandchildren, so there's more representation from one family versus another. Like that next generation. How do you deal with grandchildren that want to get involved?
Well, sometimes grandchildren are fabulous caregivers and can be brought into these family conversations. And so I think we can't assume that they should be outside the caregiving role. Sometimes they're excellent and come in and help because they have a great relationship with grandma and they don't the thing about skipping a generation, you don't have all the baggage, right? You didn't get raised, but right, I mean that's the realism, so all of our feelings about our parents and what they did and didn't do for good and for bad, the grandchildren typically don't have that. So sometimes it's good if the grandchildren are a problem, or I have grandkids and you don't, you're like, I don't want your kids involved in this. I think it's a conversation about who in our family are we going to say gets to make caregiving decisions and who maybe are people who do tasks. And you have to try to come to some agreement on that about who can make decisions and who can do tasks.
Decisions versus tasks. Excellent delineation. Just finally, and this is a question from me, not a listener, but if people, and you've kind of intimated at this, but I really want to be clear for people, if they have issues that they can't resolve, that they just can't get to, it's not a failure on their part. These are tough, tough things. Where can people turn, Dr. Amy?
So let me say that the best thing to do, there are mediators who do this kind of work, and we hear mediator and we think, oh, people are in major crisis, but there's mediators who work on the preventive side of mediation. So that you can look for those people. You can look for geriatric care managers. It's not a title we use as much in Canada, but you can Google that. They often can facilitate family conversations. Social workers can. You could call if your parent has dementia. Absolutely use the Alzheimer's Society as a resource. So all of those kind of places to find someone who can help you with these conversations. You're not a failure. It's the typical family. When there are big issues, people often need someone who can help guide the conversation.
Dr. Amy, this has been amazing.
Oh, thank you. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, Teri.
Well, thank you so much. I can't tell you, I know that this is going to be immensely valuable to people. And I think that we're going to get more questions after people listen to this episode. So I look forward to that. I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you
I'd
so
love
very
that.
much for being here on the Heart of It All.
Thanks so much, Teri.
Well, in all honesty, I do hope that none of this applies to you. I hope you have smooth sailing with your siblings, but the chances of absolutely no conflict is difficult to imagine. Thanks so much to Dr. Amy D'Aprix for being here. If you like what you're hearing on this podcast, please do us a favor, subscribe, and leave a comment. You can also follow us on whatever social channel or channels that you love: Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok at the Heart of It All Pod. From my co-producers, Justin Carey at 6 of 1 Digital, and myself, Teri Hart, thanks so much for listening, and please take care. Well, you know I love a good Canadian movie recommendation, and this week is Home Free. Three sisters, played by Natalie Brown, Michelle Nolden, and Tara Spencer-Nairn, go home to visit their parents for their anniversary, find out dad is sick, and he has a plan. Not all the sisters agree with the plan. It's written and directed by Avi Federgreen. You will have big feelings watching this, and it might start a conversation. I recommend using some of Dr. Amy's tips. Check it out. It's called Home Free.